Today on Talk Shop, we're going to be replacing fan belts on this Infiniti G35. We're going to use original equipment fan belts. That's the only way to go on these things, it seems. We're also going to be looking at the heater hoses and, of course, the radiator hoses. So what we've got here is a typical V6 engine. This is the upper rad hose right here, and it feels okay, not too bad. A little bit of things on hoses. Heater hoses, radiator hoses, manufacturers recommend replacement every 4 years or 96,000 kilometers. Check your maintenance book and see when yours is recommended to be replaced. Of course, your rad flush, you might as well do it at the same time when you do something like that. Now, if you can see inside here, we're going to be replacing the fan belts on this vehicle. One belt is very, very severely cracked, and the other one is just starting to go too. On this vehicle, we have to replace the fan belts from underneath. It's not something you can do on the side of the road. It's real easy. Shields have to be removed and what have we. So I'll get the guys to it in a second. And I just want to talk a little bit about these belts here. These are factory replacement belts, and they seem to be the only ones that work on these vehicles. I don't know why, but that's the way it goes with these vehicles. So you can see right now what Ryan's doing, he's removing the lower shield that covers up the whole engine in order to access the adjusters for the fan belts. One other little note about fan belts, they're the same as hoses. Manufacturers recommend replacement every 4 years or 96,000 kilometers. You may want to check in your owner's manual to see when that needs to be done. Sometimes, like I say, a fan belt will look great, but it's actually worn out when you do the depth test on them. So what Paul's doing right now is he's loosening off, it looks like both adjusters. Sometimes you have to work them back and forth because they do get rusty and they do seize up. So you just take your time and work them back and forth and everything comes off. If you find that the adjuster is seized, you may have to take the whole thing off and put it on a bench, try and clean it up or heat it up, whatever you got to do to it. They're all different. A lot of times they come off easy, a lot of times they don't. So this belt here was the one that we really couldn't see very well. And you can see it's got a pile of cracks in it. Okay. This belt is probably an original belt by the looks of it, and the car's got 180,000 kilometers on it. So I'm glad we're changing this now, because for the summer, you might run into a problem. And when we get the other one off, the power steering one, it's the one that's very badly cracked, and you'll see how worn out it is. Oh, wow. Okay, well, it was time for this one 100%. This has got chunks missing right out of it. So this one has taken a severe beating. And there's no use to me even get the depth gauge on this thing because it's completely destroyed. A lot of signs to look for when your belts are wearing out. Sometimes you'll hear a slight squeal coming off a fan belt. And if your car is about 3 years old and it's a little damp outside, that's usually when you start to hear a little bit of a belt squeal. That means the belt's dried out. It's lost its content of moisture inside it. Eventually that belt will have a problem. It might wind up just like our AC belt that's all cracked and chipped. Another thing to look for is if you start up your car in the morning and you hear a huge squeal come out of the engine compartment, that's a good sign that the belts are two things, loose or need replacement. There's a whole bunch of things to look for like that. When an engine's cold is when you mainly find out when you have a bad fan belt. And one other thing to remember too, after you install fan belts on a vehicle, give it a few 100 kilometers and bring it back in and double check the fan belt tension, because belts do stretch. They are made out of rubber. These ones here from the manufacturer very rarely stretch. For some reason they seem to be the best ones that work. A good way to check your fan belts too is deflection. When the belts are tight, you shouldn't be able to turn them more than 90 degrees when they're in place. So if you can turn a belt that much, then it's obviously not tight enough. When you got everything tightened up, it should only move a little bit. You okay, Paul?
Yep.
Okay. There you go, here's the other one.
Thank you.
Now, if you look at the way a fan belt gets rooted, I have seen people putting them on backwards. I've seen them turning the engine an opposite way, turning the water pumps the wrong way. And people will put on a fan belt on a vehicle and all of a sudden their car is overheating because the water pump is turning the wrong way. So please pay attention to how everything goes on the vehicle, because if you put it on backwards, you may run into a huge problem later on. A lot of times after people get their fan belts replaced, or even if the belt's fairly new, a week or two old, you might get a belt squeal. You need to get it readjusted. Most likely there's nothing wrong but a readjustment. Also, when they were in there, they were checking all the pulleys. to make sure everything's fine. And so far, so good. Everything's fine on this vehicle. Sometimes you'll get a belt squeal in the morning. It may not be the belt. It may be one of the tensioners not free enough. Overnight, it seizes up. When you start up in the morning, it screams. You need to get that checked out, and the best way to do it is you drop it off at your mechanic shop, and they check it out when it's cold. So you leave it overnight, they check it out in the morning to make sure. So you saw what it takes just to do a couple of fan belts on this vehicle. There's a big shield that has to come off. You got to access everything. You got to make sure everything moves, and you got to double check everything. So when the vehicle comes down, they'll run it for a few minutes, and we'll double check it. Oh, they look really, really good, nice and straight. Brand new belts. Everything's nice. Okay, if you just want to shut it off for me. Now I'm just going to check the tension on the belts from the top here because I can access them. Always make sure that nobody is near the ignition when you do this, because that's very important. We've seen people lose fingers this way, so. Perfect. Very good. Well, there you have it. Fan belts are on, everything's adjusted. This vehicle will come back. We're going to do upper and lower rad hoses, and we're going to give it a nice flush later on.